the biggest struggles of writing YA fantasy was for you?
So the question was, what are the biggest struggles of writing YA fantasy? I think for me, knowing when to stop doing research is my biggest struggle, because I love doing research. For Smoke in the Sun and Flame in the Mist, there was actually a day that I watched a 9-hour documentary on how to make a samurai sword. This was the best utilization of my time I have ever experienced in my life. So I started watching it in the morning, and my husband left for work, and I was in my pajamas on the couch. He came back home. I was in the exact same place with pencils shoved through my hair and Cheeto dust everywhere. And he's like, "Have you gone out ever?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I took the dog out, but you gotta watch this documentary." He's like, "Maybe let's go out. Maybe you should wash your face." All that kind of stuff. So yeah.
So I think early on, I struggled with stakes, which is sort of ironic, but with sort of making things worse and worse and worse. I was too nice to my character, so I kept kind of pulling my punches, and then I just totally did a U-turn. And it was one of those things where you try to turn your weakness into a strength. So I did struggle a lot with that at the beginning, and then later what I struggled with was trying to sort of contain the story, because I'd have all these side stories and other adventures that I'd want to happen, and I couldn't put them in the book because then it would be 1,100,000 words long, and that would suck. So I had to learn to sort of cut back and figure out what actually needed to be in the story, what was important to the characters' motivations and their goals, and what was sort of extraneous and could be cut out. Anyone else? Yes, right in front. Bring the hog archer.
Yes. So pick 3 characters in your books. Who would you cast as them in a movie?
Oh, this is so hard. So she asked, pick 3 characters in our books and who will we cast them in a movie. I am really bad at this kind of stuff.
Yeah, we both
we're very bad. I think the only thing that would matter to me is that they weren't whitewashed.
Same.
That would be the big thing. I would put down my foot really hard on that one.
Or take off our shoes and throw them.
Yes. Well, no, I don't want to throw my shoes.
Well, they're
I'll
good
show
shoes,
someone else's
so
shoes.
fair.
They're really beautiful.
Thank
Those
you.
are awesome shoes.
How about over here?
Did both of you start with writing a novel, or did either one of you start with writing any short stories or anything?
I used to write short stories, but Ember was my first novel. I just worked on it for 6 years because I'm incredibly stubborn, maybe to a fault. But I know Renee worked on. Did you work on shorter stuff?
I did. So my first foray into writing was Nancy Drew fan fiction before it was a thing. And then the next thing I did was I wrote in high school really bad emo poetry, which I then burned, which is a tragedy. It's a real it wasn't at all. It's a very emo thing to do with your emo poetry and burn it. And then I wrote short stories after that. And The Wrath and the Dawn, my first published novel with Penguin, was the 5th book I ever wrote.
There was a question right behind you. Yes.
What was your inspiration writing Reaper at the Gates?
My inspiration for Reaper was a lot of what's happening in our world right now. So I did a lot of research on refugee camps, on the refugee crisis going on in Europe and the Middle East. I did a lot of research on sort of what life is like in refugee camps and how refugees are treated. I did research and also looked into my own family and my own life on the feeling of otherization and how what it feels like to sort of not fit in. I know that intimately, but I also talk to other people who have been through that in an attempt to sort of understand other people's experiences with feeling like they don't fit in. And it really was a continuation of the story. And the original Ember in the Ashes was inspired by stories I read while I was working at the Washington Post. I used to work there late at night. I think my mind was probably really more open to, crazy ideas. And so I read a story about people whose fathers and brothers and sons were taken by local military forces in a place called Kashmir, and then thrown into prison. And these people, these women were telling this story, and they couldn't get their family members back. And as someone who has, brothers and a dad and family who I really love, it was sort of a wake-up call and a thought like, oh wow, that could happen to me. And so I started writing a story about, well, what if that did happen to someone, but she could actually fight back? So that's where that's where the series came from, and then Reaper specifically was the stuff we talked about. That was a great question, thank you. So like way in the back.
Hi.
Yes. Hello.
No?
No, I said hello. I was greeting you. Yeah, because you're so far away.
My question's for Renee. You have such rich settings in your stories that they kind of become characters in themselves. With Japan and Persia and now New Orleans, do you find that the settings inform the stories or the stories inform the settings? Is it kind of a give and take?
First of all, thank you so much. That is such a wonderful compliment. I definitely actually start with settings before I do anything else. So I'll spend some time conducting research, but I'll pick the setting first because to me, it's almost like the canvas upon which you paint the rest of the story. And after doing the setting and really world building that and including lots of sensory details, because I think, again, going back to the Anne Rice thing, something very immersive, something very transportive. And to me, that involves all of the senses, not just what you see and what you hear, but what you taste, what you smell, tactile things. So I spend a lot of time doing that, and then I move on to character, and then I move on to plot. And obviously for plot and for tension, I'm turning to people like this person over here.
Usually I'm just like, no, be meaner. Nope.
So that's really what I do. I'm like, I feel like this scene needs to be meaner, and I will literally call her and be like, I need this scene to be nastier. Help me.
Yes, right here. in the front.
Okay, I have two questions for both Sabaa and Renee. First off, Renee, I know you like the Nancy Drew books.
Yes.
What is your favorite one so far?
Nancy Drew books? Oh my gosh. You know, I probably have to say The Secret of the Old Clock, because it was the first one, and it was the one that really made me fall in love with mystery.
You are not alone in this, I think.
And as for you, Sabaa, I know that Renee's favorite villain is Ursula. What is your favorite villain?
Oh wow. I really like Hella. Yeah, I think she's pretty great. If I'm seeing dreamy, it's because I am.
That crown, man. That crown is like, I almost cheered.
Frosty eyes.
It was super awkward because I almost stood up and cheered in the theater. I was like, yeah, oh wait, she's bad.
Thank you for your questions. They're great. How about like we in the back over there? Yes, you. Hello. That's a hello, not a no.
What's the process like in finding a publisher? Like, did you write your books first, then look for a publisher, or what did you do?
You sell your soul. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. We weep many tears. So what traditionally, with traditional publishing, which is not self-publishing, we can't really speak to that, but we can speak to traditional publishing. You finish your book and then you find an agent. And an agent is someone who knows the publishing industry, hopefully, pretty well, and speaks to editors and publishers regularly. And they're sort of like gatekeepers in a way. They're also the people who will protect you from like bad contracts and hideous covers, and hopefully, and other such things. And so you have to query an agent, and that means that you finish your book, you write a letter explaining what your book is about, and then you send it to an agent in the hopes that the agent will say, hey, you know what, this sounds pretty good. Can you send me your whole book? If you need resources to sort of know how to go through that process, Nathan Bransford had a great blog. It's like nathanbransford.com or something like equally unoriginal. I mean, I don't say that in a disparaging way. It's easy to remember. Another good resource is Writer's Digest. They have pretty good advice on there for how to navigate that. How about on this side right here? Yes. I do have thoughts for the next series that I'm going to write, but if I share them, I'm pretty sure like an anvil will drop out of the sky and squash me, so I don't want to die, so, but I think I can promise that it'll be painful, so. You guys already know that. How about right here? Yes.
So when like writing your plot, do you already know what's gonna happen at the end with the characters?
So, like, in writer parlance, everybody likes to say you're either a plotter or a pantser. Neither Sabaa nor I like that at all, because all we're thinking about is like a John Hughes movie where somebody's in a gym and yanking. It's not good. And I actually much prefer George R. R. Martin's analogy, which is you're either an architect or a gardener. An architect approaches writing a book with like a blueprint, has a scaffolding, whereas a gardener just plants seeds and watches them grow. In that analogy, I'm very much an architect. I make really elaborate outlines that are written in gibberish only I can understand. She's seen them before.
They're pretty bad.
It's embarrassing. Like it'll have like keywords and little phrases that I'm like, oh, I wanna put this in the scene, and it's gibberish. But to me, it makes sense, and I'll do this really elaborate, like often like 20-page outline before I even begin writing.
I am not that organized. Mine involves much more panic. And much more sort of this seems like a good idea, oh, that was a bad idea. So what I usually do is I start off really well-intentioned, guys. I'm like, I'm going to plot this book, and it's not going to be 6 months late. I'm not going to get yelled at. It's going to be early, and it's going to be amazing, and my editor's going to be like, I don't have to edit this. This is the best thing I've ever read. So then I start writing that version of the book, and it ends up being really dumb. And then I'm like, okay, I think I need to garden a little bit. I think I need to sort of let my mind play. And so then I like play in the garden for a little while, and then I come back and I rewrite, and then I go and I architect some more, and then I'm like, that was a dumb idea. And it's sort of this back and forth thing, and then somehow, there might be some like sacrifices to dark gods, but I end up with a book at the end of that. And it really is a mixture of both things. I go back and forth between them. So how about right over here?
I was just wondering where the inspiration for the masks that melded their faces. It's so unusual. I've never seen anything like that.
Thanks. So the masks came from a picture I saw. It was a picture out of, I believe, the Ukraine. And it was a picture of rioters facing off with riot police. And the rioters, you could see their emotions on their faces. They were angry, and they were sad, and they were frustrated. And they were staring up at these police officers who had riot masks all over their face, and there was no emotion. And as I was looking at that, I was thinking about what it would feel like to be fighting for your life and to be looking at your enemy and to not be able to see any emotion. And then, because I'm me, I was like, how can I make that even worse? And what if you could see their faces, but there was still no emotion? And that's where I came up with the idea of the mask, was sort of meld to your face, and you can see the person's expression, you can see their eyes, you can see maybe what's going through their head, but the worst part about it is that there's nothing there because their humanity has been stripped from them. That got darker than I thought. Sorry.
But no one is surprised, are we? How about right here? Very frank. Yes.
Okay. So I have two questions. One's for my best friend Yasmin, and she wasn't able to be here, so I'm gonna ask this question on her behalf for you. We heard that originally, like, your book was supposed to be a standalone, so how did you kind of, like, morph that into saying, like, oh, I want to continue the storyline and add more to it and, like, kind of grow on it more?
That's a great question. So the book was actually never a standalone. It was sold by itself. I had a 4-book arc planned, and when I went into negotiations with Penguin, which is my publisher, I told them I have 4 books in this series. And they were basically like, okay, well, let's see how the first one goes. And so it was, and my agent at the time, who represented me, said, I believe in your story enough that I think you're going to sell the rest of the series, but you have to believe in it enough. If you believe in it enough, then let's do this, and let's sell this book, and then let's fight for it to be a big book. So we kind of took a leap, and that's what we did, and then all of you made it so I could write the rest, so thank you, you're amazing.
And then my second question is, I love rock, and I know you love rock, and it's kind of sad because, like, rock is dying slowly as the decades go on, but I want to know, what are your top 3 favorite bands to listen to when you write, and also for you, Renee, like, what are the types of music that you listen to help you guys write and get the words flowing?
I really like writing battle scenes to Skrillex.
You would! That's so you! Oh my goodness, that's the most Renee thing I've ever heard.
And I wrote a lot of the romantic scenes in Wrath of the Dawn and Rose and the Dagger to Rimsky-Korsakov's Scheherazade suite.
I'm pulling up my phone, not because I'm a millennial.
She has the most extensive music list. It's amazing.
but because I have playlists. So
Yeah.
I don't necessarily have like one band I listen to. I just have really long playlists, which I will post up eventually. But the Reaper playlist has stuff like Don't Fear the Reaper by Apollo 440, which I think is hilarious. It has Waste a Moment by Kings of Leon. It has Don't Forget Sister by Low versus Diamond. It has Fiction by Kygo. It has Distant Solar Systems by Julian Baker. It has Push It by Garbage, 90s, anyone? It has Never Love Me by Griffin Oscar. I will stop soon, but you gave this to me, so I'm going to keep going. It has what I think is sort of the theme song of the book, which is Beat in the Pulse by Astra. If you look at the back of Reaper, on the very last page, there's actually a paragraph in the acknowledgments that's sort of a mini playlist. I usually thank the artists of the song, even though I know they're never going to see this. Though, guys, guess what? Okay, I have to share this. So one of the songs that I really loved was the song by an artist named Matt Mason. And he thanked me today. It was wild. He saw this somehow on Twitter. I don't know how, because I didn't tag him, because I was like, I didn't want to do that. That's weird. And he was like, hey, Sabaa, thank you so much. And I was freaking out. It was really a big moment for me. Anyway, that got weird. But okay, how about way in the back over there?
I was wondering if there's a scene for each of you that stands out as like the most difficult one you've had to write.
I simultaneously, I write as a writer, but I also write as a reader. And it's the same thing for when I'm reading anything Sabaa writes. So it's difficult because like, you will read something or you'll write something, you'll think, this is terrible, how could I do this to my characters? Or how could Sabaa do this to her characters? And that's like reading it as a reader. But then as a writer, you're like, ha 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 ha. It's so good. And for me, a scene, and I cried a lot writing this, but I loved it as a writer, even though it broke me as a reader. It's probably a scene where a character dies in The Rose and the Dagger. That was a very
I know this scene. It was deeply upsetting.
It was a very hard. But just know I cried a lot. The reader and me cried a lot. The writer was delighted. So, and I feel that way when I'm reading your stuff too. I'm like, this is terrible and wonderful all at once.
So the hardest scene for me was a scene in Amber in the Ashes, and it was a scene between Elias and Marcus. It happens at the very end of the third trial, and for anyone who hasn't read it, I don't want to spoil it because that sucks, but there's a conversation that happens between Elias and Marcus, and it's sort of a quiet conversation. And that was really difficult to write because I initially had that conversation be a little bit more explosive because these two like really hate each other. And then it kept occurring to me that was wrong and that wasn't right and it wasn't fitting, and I wrote and rewrote that scene like a trillion billion times until I finally got it right. And it was a sad scene, and it made me really sad, and it made me sad for one of my villains, because it's kind of the first time I think you see his humanity in the book. So that one was really hard to write. That was a great question. Thank you. Two more questions. Okay, so how about right here?
What do you mean?
So the question was, how do we come up with the names of our characters?
I am very extra about my character names. Super precious. So I will name a character like Character X for an entire book if I do not have the right name. I do tons of research on names. I try them out, I say them, I look for their meanings. The name Laya means sweet-voiced, and I chose that because, of course, she's a storyteller and she likes to tell stories. The name Elias means the Lord is my God. So, and that to me is a very submissive name. So, in a sense, I kind of told you what Elias, was which way he was heading, with his name. And that's what I sort of do, is I try to tie these characters' destinies into their names. Because I think that names have really deep meaning, and names play a big role in Reaper, and will play a bigger role in the fourth book. And I don't want to spoil anything, but you will see that as sort of the series goes along.
Names are very important for me too. I spend a lot of time on like baby naming websites because you can get actually sort of like the meaning behind names, their roots, their etymologies, that kind of stuff. So it's very important to me. Like for instance, when I was naming in Wrath and the Dawn and the Rose and the Dagger, Jahandar, who is actually a villain in that series, that name means possessor of the world, and that was important to me.
Okay, so one more question. How about right here? You. Yes.
I'll give mine to her.
Okay, you. That's really sweet.
Oh.
That's why you should get the question. So you go ahead.
Oh, I forgot my. What type of books would your characters read?
The question was, what type of books would our characters read?
I mean, Helene would clearly read baking books. Laya, I think, would read like stories like I do. She would like fantasy. Elias, gosh, I don't know. I think Elias would read stories with like, idiot, noble characters who do foolish things, but eventually it all works out. I think, you know what? No, let me rephrase that, because I've discovered that I think Elias likes rom-coms, like secretly. And like really loves happy endings and is like a sucker for them. So I think he might actually enjoy reading romance novels. Oh, that's perfect. So Elias would love Regency romance. Sorry, Elias, I just trolled you.
But then Elias would be hanging out with Shahrazad, because I could see Shahrazad reading a lot of Regency romance. I could see Khalid.
Khalid read about dead presidents.
Dead presidents and Art of War books. I could see him like Sun Tzu, all this kind of stuff. And I think
and all those like business books that are like how to destroy your enemies.
Marco would be reading books about like chemistry, like early alchemy and all that kind of stuff. And Okami wouldn't read; he'd be sleeping.
Thank you guys so much for your questions. This was absolutely wonderful.
Thank you so much. And for everyone who came out tonight, I really appreciate it. Thank you. We're not trivia. We're doing a raffle.